I am talking with a former Bay Area news guy, Marty Lenz, who's now at KOA in Denver. He's one of their news guys. He and I have a mutual friend in Christopher Gabriel, and we're all big sports fans. And Marty used to be at KCBS, NBC Bay Area. He was on Cron 4. He has been around, but he just recently moved back to his home in Denver. And he's also he's got his hat on. He's also a very proud Colorado State guy. And he's having an adult beverage with us too, which makes it even better.
The old Aggie, the CSU Ram beer. There it is.
Okay, Marty, how good is the beer?
It is good.
Really?
It is good. I mean, I had to do a blind taste test because our arch rival, the University of Colorado, came out with their own beer too, like Buffalo Stampede. And I'm on the air. The station I work at, KOA, we happen to be the voice of the CU Buffalo. So the irony of me being a CSU guy being on a CU station was not lost on me. But I had to do a blind taste test. Now, I've drank enough of this to know what it tastes like. But honestly, having both beers, and I picked this, and this one of the 5 people that we had tasters, all 5 picked Old Aggie. So, and that doesn't mean the Buffalo beer was bad. I'm not saying it was, but this is a good beer. So
it's a very political answer too. That was
I know. Yes.
You don't want to piss off the CU people, right?
No, because they listen to our station too, as Michael Jordan would say. They buy sneakers too, so you have.
There you go. Marty, let's talk about your CSU career. Oh boy, that would have got me a fine on Christopher. Let's talk about your Rams career. You were on the football team.
I was. From 1986 to 1990. I was a very marginal D1 player, but I was proud to be, like anybody in sports, I was proud to be something greater and bigger than myself. My claim to fame, my statistics, my stat line, 1 catch for 7 yards. So, which I guess, unless I'm going to have like 100 catches and be really exceptional, is it better to have 1 catch for 7 yards or maybe have 12 for X amount? I came close to having a touchdown, but that eluded me as well. But no, I mean, it was honestly one of the best experiences. I mean, I always knew I wanted to play college football. I wanted to play at the highest level I could, which was D1. But again, I was a good athlete, but I didn't get a lot of opportunities in high school. Not that I started and played, but we played the veer offense. We didn't throw all that much, so my skills weren't mostly utilized. So I knew thought I could play at a higher level. I could have gone to a lot of small colleges, but I really wanted to go to Colorado State. I had a sister up there, and I thought, they throw the football. They played in the old WAC, Western Athletic Conference, where you would score 60 points and still maybe lose. So the old BYU days and the like. So I wanted to go up there and play, and I walked on and I made the team. And, it was an amazing experience. I mean, I had, besides my stat line, I mean, the unique thing I had is I got to play for some really legendary coaches, and I had some wonderful teammates. I mean, I had a couple guys that went in the NFL, Kelly Stauffer, Sanjay Beach, guys that were older than me, Greg Primus, who is my contemporary, who's now an orthopedic surgeon in Chicago. But I got to play against some great talent, Terrence Mathis, Chad Henning, who was at the Air Force Academy and went on and played with the Cowboys. He won the Outland Trophy. But the neatest experience for me, I had 4 different position coaches in 4 years. But 2 of those coaches, well, one, Noel Mazzoni's still coaching. I think he's actually at Mississippi State, maybe the offensive coordinator. But I had Skip Holtz, Lou Holtz's son.
Oh, wow. And
then I had Urban Meyer as my position coach.
Wow. How was it with Urban? Because he has that reputation, he grates a lot of people the wrong way.
He's interesting. Now, I say this, and Urban's not much older than I am. I'm 52. Urban's probably, late 50s. So he was a young coach with us. He was surly. He was tough. He was direct. But I always appreciated, it's the term now, radical candor. He was very honest. And I mean, he was supportive of me, but he also told me, frankly, hey, compared to these other guys, you got a lot of work and a lot of catch up to do. And he was catching me after having a reconstructive knee surgery too. So that didn't help. But just the emotional experience of playing for a guy like that who had high expectations, he truly treated everybody the same. I wasn't Greg Primus, as I mentioned, my contemporary, who was a great, great player, all whack, everything else. But he treated us all the same. He didn't treat me less than. His expectations for me were as high, in many ways, if not higher to some degree, because I lacked skills than they were for some of the great players. He knew I had to put more out, so he expected more of me. I like that. And one of my greatest life lessons, two things I learned, which are now totally part of the football lexicon: trust the process. You got to trust the process, which you're Nick Saban or a lot of people kind of invoke these days, and also you want to complete the task, you want to finish out. And I'll share a quick anecdote about that. It was spring ball. I had not played the year prior because I blew out my ACL tendon, which at the time it took a year to recover. I wasn't Rod Woodson of the Steelers who recovered in 8 months from that surgery. But I recovered, I came back, and I was a step slower, and I wasn't as good a shape for obvious reasons. And I went to Coach Meyer, and this is during the spring, and I was on schedule to graduate in 4 years anyways. And I came to him, and I said, Coach, I know the writing on the wall. I'm realistic. He said, I appreciate the opportunity. I said, I think I'll step back now, step away. And Coach Meyer said, are you sure you want to do that? And I said, well, I'm just realistic about it. And he says, you know what? He says, I can't make you any promises. He says, and I appreciate your honesty. And he says, I don't know where you're at with this, meaning he obviously knew what I had. He says, but I think you'll regret it if you don't complete the task, if you don't finish. And so I don't want to say he made me, but he kind of compulsed me to finish spring ball and finish that way versus quitting in the middle of the process. And you know what? I am so beyond thankful that he made me at least finish the spring and finish and not quit in the middle of it. And so that taught me a lesson about, even if things aren't going your way, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And that was a lesson that I've taken through my life and my career, personally, professionally, ever since that moment. And when I saw Coach Meyer, and this is when I was doing sports talk in Denver in the early 2000s, Urban was coaching at Utah. And we were the station I was working on in Denver. We were the station for the Mountain West Conference in the Denver region. So we were out there covering the Mountain West Football Conference days. This is after the WAC transition to the Mountain West. And I saw Coach Meyer, and he came up to me, and he was like so excited to see me. And it just made me feel really good that, one, he remembered me, but two, he and I had the nicest interaction about that. And I told him, I said, Coach, that was one of the best things you ever did as a coach to tell me that. And I said, I just want you to know how much I appreciate that. So when I see Urban, I see the persona of him now coaching, obviously, since then at Florida and Ohio State, winning national championships. I say, yeah, he's surly, he's tough. And there's a part of you that you do dislike him because there's things about him that you can't square. But then I sit there and say, but I had an interaction and an experience with him that made me appreciate him and respect him from a level, because he sought something out of me and expected more out of me at a moment than I did out of myself. And I'm grateful to him for that. And I mean, like I said, that's a life lesson I take with me everywhere I go.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. It's like I was telling you before we started recording about Jim Rice, and you said, well, he had that surly reputation, but I never had a problem with him because I treated him like any other guy. And the same thing with Carl Yastrzemski. These guys had that reputation, but if you got in there and got to talk to them, you found out who they were. They didn't let a lot of people in, but I was fortunate enough to be in that little circle, I guess you would. And I understood where they were coming from, because, as a coach, you got 55 guys yelling and screaming.
Yes.
Am I not playing more? And you really can't say, hey, dude, you suck. You can't play. You know what I mean? I'm just
right.
That is a quick example. But, the media, and a lot of times really gives, especially the athletes, that jaded side, because, they're always looking for the bad. A lot of them are looking for the bad angle. And, you had that thing with Urban Meyer, which, a lot of people don't get and never have, because you had the wherewithal to come up to tell him as a man, hey, you know what, I know where this is going. I don't think I can do that, blah, blah, blah. And I think, I've never met the man, but I'm sure he really appreciated what you told him.
Well, I mean, because I was trying to be realistic at the time,
right,
and honest with myself, because you as a player, and again, I was not an elite player, but I think the greats that have high expectations, and if they don't match them, they get frustrated and disappoint themselves. And I was just disappointed because even whatever little skill I had lost and was diminished. And that was tough. It was a tough acknowledgement to know I know the end of the road. But the fact that Coach Meyer, he didn't deny me saying that I was wrong, but he said, but at the same time, there's something he was basically saying, there's something you can get from this if you complete the task, if you finish. And that's what I appreciate, because I do think there's a part of me that, had I been allowed to, or I had done that, that I would probably regret that a little more versus saying, you know what, at least I finished up to that point that I knew and I graduated. And then I look back and say, I'm glad that he encouraged me to do that. And what it made me feel like is he valued me enough, not only as a player, but as a person to say, in the long run, you'll appreciate if you do it this way. And I appreciate that he took the time, because to your point, I was not his most talented player by far, a player that needed more of his attention than some other players do. But the fact that he took the time and cared enough about me in that situation, to me, that said a lot about him. And again, it was a moment in time. There's things that have been said and written about him since. I cannot attest to or say. When people ask me, I say, this is my interaction with them. Yes, I see things too sometimes that maybe trouble me. I said, but I can't speak to that because I'm not in that situation. I don't know him in this current form. But when I knew him then, I felt I got this out of it, and I'm grateful for that.
Marty, tell me, people don't realize, we both played sports. Give me a feeling like you're playing, say you're playing Colorado at Old Hughes Stadium. What is your feeling running out onto the field before the game? Like you're running out of the tunnel right before kickoff. What emotions are going through your mind? What euphoria do you have?
It's probably the first time I put on the uniform and I ran out there. I was like, wow, I feel like I had made it. At the time, we weren't a very good football team. So, it's not like we had a full stadium. The Old Hughes Stadium only sat 30,000 people. If we had 15,000 in the stands at that time, I'd be surprised because we were on an awful losing streak. But the first time I could run out there and felt like I was a part of something, I had earned my way on, it was kind of a very surreal experience. I mean, that was pretty dang cool. Probably the coolest moment running on, besides when I caught my pass at Utah, that was cool. But when you're playing your arch rival at Hughes, when you're playing Wyoming, and I got to run on the field for Wyoming, because that was a pretty full stadium because the Wyoming fans come and the CSU fans. And for people who don't know, it's like one of the, if not the oldest continuous rivalry west of the Mississippi, Wyoming, Colorado State. We played 100+ times, though we debate about one game difference. We think we played one more time than Wyoming did, and that's all the thing of the rivalry. So that was cool to run out there against one of your biggest rivals and be a part of that. But yeah, I mean, it was just neat because that was always my goal. My goal was to play college football, to play D1 college football, and just to go out there and be on the field and get in for a few plays. I just felt like, okay, I had accomplished a personal goal. I mean, it was a really neat. This sounds cliche, but outside of getting married and seeing the birth of my children, that ranks up there as probably one of the greatest feelings I ever had.
I can attest to that. When I got married in 95, we went to New York for our honeymoon. And my wife, who is from San Diego, she's a huge baseball fan. She goes, I want to go to the Hall of Fame. I said, done deal, let's go. So we go to Cooperstown and we're walking by one of their offices and it says photo department. She goes, tell these people what you do. You never know. And I was like, they're not going to care. So I went in and met Pat Kelly, who's since retired, and I love Pat to death. She is awesome. She says, send me what you got. She calls me back a couple weeks later. She goes, your stuff is awesome. Can we keep it in our archives? So 07 rolls around and I get a phone call from Pat. She said, and she's frazzled because she's got like 8,000 things going on. And I'll never forget this. She goes, Bob, I'm sending you something. Just sign the damn thing and get it back to me. We're putting your photos up in the Hall of Fame. And she goes, I got to go. Call me later. And she hangs up. And I sat there for a second and I thought, my photos are going to be on display in Cooperstown? Are you kidding me? I made the Hall of Fame. To me, I can attest that is probably the highlight outside of getting married to my wife is the highlight of my life, because there are less photographers in the Hall of Fame than there are players.
Right.
Jean Fruth, I was talking to her about this. She said the exact same thing. It's surreal. It's almost surreal to see your imagery on display.
And knowing other people are seeing it.
Absolutely.
That people are witnessing it. And that your art and your eye is being viewed and seen by someone else's eyes and being appreciated and evaluated and just looked at from their perspective. That is wonderful. You're sharing a piece of you and a view of the world that you see.
Absolutely.
In a stadium or player, and somebody else can see and share that. That's wonderful.
You mentioned Wyoming. I had a friend from high school. She went to Wyoming. She graduated. You're at 7220 up there, and
Yeah.
you're at a mile high in Colorado. There is a difference between being a mile high and then going up another 2,000 feet to play.
Yes. Oh, there is. And then in Laramie, because there's nothing there,
It's a college town.
it's very windy. I mean, it can be extremely. Hence why they have the big windmills. They have those big windmill
Yes.
turbines for power. That's why they're in Laramie and in parts of western Nebraska and eastern Wyoming, all that whole area. But yeah, it gets windy. So couple the 7,200 feet. Yeah, I mean that's 2,000 plus feet higher than Fort Collins, and it's higher than Denver. So you couple that with the wind, and you put some snow. Besides the fact that it's Laramie, if I emphasize that enough, it's a miserable place to play when it's cold. It really, really is. I mean, in full fairness to Wyoming, it's a hell of a home field advantage.
Absolutely.
Teams less from the Mountain West, but if you're bringing in teams like I know, Tennessee came there to play, and when you get schools that are flatlanders to come in there, you take advantage of that altitude and those weather conditions, hopefully, to level the playing field if you maybe don't have the talent that some of the teams to come into play.
Well, I mean, you've watched. I know you watch a lot of college football, as do I. There's always that game that ESPN will have on at night. It's in Laramie, and it's in November, and forever. It's like almost like clockwork. There's a snowstorm.
Yeah.
And you've got the snow coming down, and the field starts out. It's not too bad, and then by halftime they got to bring out the trucks to move the snow off the field, and you see a lot of these teams that aren't used to it kind of. They kind of turtle up a little bit, you know what I mean? And they're like,
Yes,
what did we
yes.
get into? In Wyoming, that's like we were talking before we went on about the teams that played at like Mile High Stadium that would go into Mile High Stadium in the noise level. It's that home field advantage, and you have to take advantage of that. Like you have teams coming in when you were at Colorado State that weren't used to the Mile High attitude, and you could see them on the sidelines gasping for breath and using the oxygen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, we played. I mean, it was well past my days, but it was 2004 when the University of Minnesota came into Hughes Stadium, and they had Lawrence Maroney and the other great running back for Minnesota. And I've got to tell you, and they were a really good team. I mean, they were a really good team, but we had them winded that whole game. They were sucking oxygen the whole game because we just kept running and running because we knew at that time the only way we could really beat them is try to tire them out. And we came close. We didn't win, but we took advantage of the fact that they're coming from the land of 10,000 lakes and the altitude of 5 feet. So, I mean, those are the home field advantages that you have to take advantage of, whether you're playing at altitude or playing in windy conditions. So, I mean, that's part of that whole experience. And in the case of Mile High, besides literally sucking the oxygen out of you, and you see those pro teams with masks, the crowd noise, the cacophony noise, that can suck the heart and spirit out of you as well. Nothing gets a crowd more charged up as when a QB has to call timeout because he can't hear the signals over the din of the crowd. I mean, again, you take advantage of those things. And as somebody who knows stadiums very well and takes pictures, when they're building some of these stadiums now, like I think of what is it, the field in Seattle, where the way they build it specific for sound because
Absolutely.
of that home field advantage, the 12th man. So
absolutely, and it reminds me a lot that the CenturyLink Field in Seattle where the Seahawks play. It's like you said, it's like this. A lot of people don't understand noise when you're at that angle, the noise goes down. There's nowhere for it to go because you've got everybody leaning forward, screaming their lungs out, and you can't hear yourself think. It's loud. CG and I've talked about this a lot. Chicago Stadium. I've told people I have never ever been in a louder situation than a Blackhawks game. They get revved up and the anthem starts. And then they've got the Barton organ going. And then when the Hawks score a goal, the foghorn goes off. The building literally shakes. You can't hear your neighbor next to you. And I'm not making any of this up. This CG will attest to this. It's an experience. I wish people could experience stuff like that. The intimidating factor, like you said, going to Wyoming where you're at 7220. And, even a team that plays at Mile High, you're intimidated by that 2,000 feet altitude because the air is a heck of a lot thinner than it is at 5,000 feet.
Well, and having the opportunity to play collegiately, you go into the state as a player, the perspective is different, but as a fan, and I'm a season ticket holder and I've gone, when you sit as a fan and you sit there and think about it, that even changes your perspective even more. And because probably even to some degree as a player, you're so focused on the moment, you can maybe at times tune out things. But when you're a fan and you hear that and you see the reaction of the players, you're just like, I get to see it from two different perspectives, and I find it fascinating, even though I'm 30 plus years removed as a player, to realize or try to remember what it was like in that moment, and now see it as a fan to feel in many ways as energized by saying, because I'm a part of this collective of people, 30, 40,000 people in the case of when we go to the new CSU stadium at Canvas, and you just sit there and say, wow, this is really cool to be something greater. I hope, and I remember what it meant to me as a player to have the fans really behind us and really cheering for us.
Do you miss Hughes Stadium at all? I know the conveniences. I've been to the new stadium. It's beautiful. It is gorgeous. And, I know parking is a bit, it's hard. It's like anything
Complicated.
It's a challenge to go to a game, but do you miss Hughes Stadium at all?
I mean, I'll miss the history of it, but as a building, as a facility, as a location, the fact that it was 3.5 miles from campus, no. And I think, and I'll give you a little backstory. Hughes was built in 1967, happened to be the year I was born, but that's incidental. The reason they built Hughes, because Colorado Field was functional, is because CSU was not going to get invited to the old Western Athletic Conference if they didn't have a better facility. So fast forward that to the aughts, to 2000s. Part of the reason that they built Canvas, well, a couple reasons, but part of the reason they built Canvas is because if CSU would, like a lot of schools, want to ascend to one of the Power 5 schools, simply because there's just more money, more opportunities, more revenue, more eyeballs, everything like that. And one of the things that was holding them back, they got a lot of other things covered. They have the academics, the research. We're doing much better in donor dollars and fan support, but we really needed to upgrade the facility. So they built Canvas with that in mind. 2, Hughes Stadium was very costly to maintain because it was built not necessarily on the bentonite soil that sinks, but it cost $15 million, I think, and I could be wrong. People can check those numbers, in just maintenance and repairs on a regular basis.
Wow.
So why do you want to continue to prop that up when you know it's an older facility, as opposed to investing in a new one that you hope is going to take you to a new level? And thirdly, and this is interesting, you'll see this now, I don't have to tell you, college sports has become an arms race, meaning that you got to have facilities and the like. And, universities can't rely on state funding all the time to get where they need to academically and profile-wise. So our president, Dr. Tony Frank, who personally I think is one of the most brilliant people ever and has been unbelievably transformative for Colorado State, he decided we need to move the stadium on campus. And here's why. Because with Hughes being 3.5 miles away from the rest of campus, a lot of times fans would go to the game but never matriculate to campus.
Right.
And so there'd be a disconnect between the sports and the academic side and the research side of CSU. Now what you do is you have them connected, and literally by location, but also psychologically, you're more apt to learn more about the rest of the university and potentially invest dollars in the academic side as well as the athletic side. And that's being borne out to be true, because right now when it comes to revenue with stadiums, we're like number 1 or number 2 in the conference behind Boise State when it comes to what we're getting revenue-wise with the stadium. We signed a big signature deal with Canvas Credit Union. So all those things come into play because universities need money to survive and thrive. So that's a long way of saying I miss some of the history of Hughes because I played in Hughes, but the reality is it was the best move for it to be gone and be done. And I know there's some old-time CSU people that predate me. They love it because of the history. They love it, to your point, for the parking. But I think sometimes with some things we can get caught in nostalgia. And like you and I were talking off before we started the broadcast, Hughes Stadium is not quite like Yankee Stadium. I mean, if there was a ton of winning at Hughes where there was multiple championships and this, that, and I mean, there were a few in the Sonny Lubick days, so don't get me wrong, a lot. You did a great job. But the lore of Hughes Stadium is not quite like a Yankee Stadium or some of these other hallowed grounds. There is some history with it. I'm not going to diminish that whatsoever. But, it's not like such a setup and so iconic that it could not be removed. And so in that case, no, I was more than happy with it. It's not like you go to probably not the best analogy. It's like if you go to Michigan Stadium. That's iconic. I mean, that really is. And Hughes wasn't like that for a variety of reasons. So I miss the history, but no, the facility itself, no, I don't miss.
Well, you mentioned Colorado Field. That was the former stadium before Hughes, and I've seen pictures of it. Now it's their track and field facility. They've gutted it. They've ripped everything down. but it was more of a glorified high school field. But back in the day, that's what college
That's
football
what they
was
do.
like.
Right.
I see some of these universities where they played before, before their bigger stadiums, and you're thinking, my high school field was better than that. But
Yep.
back in the days, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, it wasn't that big of a deal. College football was good, but it wasn't, what it is today,
Right.
where like to the point you made, if you want to get the good recruits, you need to have a nice facility. They don't want some crappy locker room with high school lockers. They want the nice facility, the nice workout areas, a player's lounge. They want to be close to campus. And it helped. The newer stadiums obviously help in recruiting.
Yeah. Oh, they do. Well, that, and then to kind of pivot on that, uniforms. I mean, I remember as a kid, we were talking about the first time, I was just glad I got a uniform. I was just glad, God, I get to suit up. But and again, young people are different today. But that's why you see, well, it's a revenue stream too, but that's why you see alternative uniforms for a majority of these universities. I mean, there's some, Alabama doesn't do it, Penn State doesn't do it, but they're iconic and they've won multiple national championships and have more money than God. They don't have to worry about that. But honestly, what put Oregon on the map was when Phil Knight decided to give him $1 billion and say, I want you to be my demo for all these colors and uniforms and schemes. And Oregon basically built their program because they had a fashion sense. So you see all these schools now, trying to have different alternative uniforms to attract young kids who say, ooh, I want, because back in the day, you were just like, look, you're going to play whatever, just wear what we got. Now it's like, I want to look good. It's the psychology of it. So it's all the marketing piece, and you were so right. The business, college football's changed, but the business of college football with stadiums, uniforms, and all the accoutrements is way radically different than even it was 30 years ago when I was playing.
Well, the kids today, you mentioned Oregon and Uncle Phil. He did that. He knew what he was getting into because he knew the mindset of people. He goes, if I come out with these, all these different jerseys. I mean, Oregon's got 843 different uniform styles they can use. But if we come out with it's money in his pocket because the kids, everybody's gonna, the fans. I gotta have this jersey. I gotta have this helmet. I gotta have this. They want everything. And I used to be like that. I can't do that anymore because I want to retire someday. But he was the one that did it. And you see like Maryland. In that, some of the helmets that Maryland has, it's like, oh,
the state flag helmet. Oh God! But see, to that point, I know I was going to the point. Like you're wearing your Colorado shirt. That's the Colorado state flag, right?
Yes, and that's a nod to you since
thank you.
You're in Denver, so I thought I would wear that.
So we have an alternative uniform that is not green and gold at all. It's the colors of the Colorado state flag. Why? Because we are the Colorado State University. So we have our state pride uniform that we play in once a year. That honestly, I bought some gear from 30 years ago. They're like blue, white, silver, red. What are you wearing? No, it's green and gold. Well, and then even before then, our original colors were what they used to call pumpkin and alfalfa. It's orange and green. So now we have an alternative jersey, an orange jersey, like almost the old Broncos jersey that we wear on our homecoming days to embrace our old Colorado Aggie roots because we were Colorado A&M before we went to Colorado State. So the whole point, it's marketing, it's merchandising. And yes, I'm 52 and I got sucked into it by buying stuff. So yeah, I'm as guilty of being marketed to and buying into it as the young people I'm mocking to some degree for choosing their school because of how they're going to look.
At least you don't have the vertical socks like the Broncos had. Oh my God, that had to be a nightmare and a half. I mean, if you're an opposing team in the old AFL in the early 60s and you see those vertical socks with the Broncos, you're like, are you kidding me?
Those are the Frank Tripucka days.
Yes, those. Yeah.
Google that name, young people. The father of Kelly Tripucka, which you probably still have to Google that name too. But anyway, so.
Now the thing that I liked about Colorado State, and I've been there twice. The campus is interwoven into a neighborhood, which you know what I mean, which very few schools do anymore, or do. I mean, you could go to a football game and probably walk home if you lived, a few blocks away from campus, and you have all these, you've got Colorado State here, and you've got all these houses around it, and you've got like this family vibe going on, that it's a family-friendly university, if that's a little corny, but. You know what I'm getting
yes.
at?
No, I do. And it's interesting because back in my day, I mean, there was the moniker for CSU in the late 90s and 2000s. CSU stood for Construction State University because of all the building that they were going on campus. Because, I mean, they made a major investment in the academic side, redoing the dorms, and a lot of, we got a lot of big time donors that are building engineering halls or business schools and the like. So at the time I was there, it's interwoven in the community, but the campus seemed much more spread out because there were less buildings and facilities on campus. Now it seems a little tighter because there's probably at least 75% more buildings and facilities in that same, if you want to say, kind of radius. But you are right. The campus, back in the day, it seemed spread out to me because we had less buildings, but it is kind of a tighter, smaller campus. It's not as sprawled out. Like I'm trying to think of campuses I've gone to. Well, yeah, if I've gone down to Palo Alto, Stanford's a nice campus, but it seems a little more spread out, or some other campuses.
Yes, it is.
Cal Berkeley's kind of like that. It's kind of tight in among the neighborhood, and we don't have the hill feel of that. To some degree, even the University of Colorado, which is in Boulder, has a little more of a tight kind of neighborhood sort of feel to it. So to your point, it's not spread out like Westwood, where UCLA is, and some of the other campuses. And I'm not mocking Westwood. I think it's actually kind of neat. But yeah, it does have kind of a neighborhood sort of, if you want to say, mid-America feel to it. You're doing. I mean, I'm biased. I think Fort Collins, I think CSU is one of the best campuses around. And the words got out about Fort Collins. I mean, it is one of the more desirable places to live for a lot of reasons. And I think, preponderance of that has to do with CSU.
Did you keep your uniform? That's what I wanted to ask you. Did you keep the helmet at least?
No, I mean, I was probably too afraid to ask. I probably didn't feel I was worthy of it. Probably could have kept a jersey. No, I didn't. The one thing I had my nameplates. So the Lenz name, I did get those. And so I have one of those in my little football scrapbook. The other one that I had, because I had my home and away jersey, not to be maudlin, but when my dad passed away in 1999, because he was always one of my biggest advocates, and he was there in Utah when I made my one catch for 7 yards. And I got to tell you, it's so bizarre. I look up in the stands, and it's a pretty full stadium. Utah had a pretty good team, and it was a pretty decent crowd. And I don't know why, but I locked in, and I see my dad in the stands. Of all the places I look, I see my dad. And this is my dad. He just gives me a thumbs up. And I always remember thinking, how cool is that I'm just looking around after I make this play to get back to the huddle, and I see my dad, and I kept necked eyes with him. So long story short, one of the nameplates when he passed away, I buried with him in his casket. I said, this is my honor to you for always being there. So I have the nameplates. I have that.
My stepdad raised me, and my stepdad was the smartest man I have ever met outside of my personal physician. Dad was an engineer for Rockwell. He was an electrical engineer. He did all the electrical work for the space shuttles.
Wow.
Supervisor. And he got the man on the moon. He was on the Apollo project and all that stuff. And I remember when I was younger, like in my early 20s, and I was going on all these trips, that I really couldn't afford and taking all these photos. He looked at me and he said, that's a quirky little hobby, but get a real job. And, 40 years later, I didn't listen to Dad. We do what we do. And it's fun. I know you love what you do, especially with news. And, you get to interview so many different people and so many different, a demographic here and a demographic over here, which is like complete 360 of what this one is. I think it's fascinating what you do on the air.
Well, I'm very blessed. I love what I do, Bob. I mean, I feel I kind of, for lack of a better term, I feel like I have a seat at the table in the proceedings. And I mean, and the thing is, I'm pretty vociferous about consuming news and information anyways, that if I wasn't doing what I was doing, I still would be watching and paying attention to the news cycle and seeing what's going on. And the fact that, it's a way of still doing work, but I'm getting paid and it's a part of my job, I thoroughly love. I am very lucky because I get access to people that as a you want to say a regular citizen, I wouldn't get access to. So I get to ask questions that I'm curious to know answers to. Of people that people don't get access to. I also like to think I advocate for people and try to think what would Jane on the street want to know that would impact her life. So I always try to think of questions that our listeners may want to have answers to too. And yes, I've been lucky. I mean, I got to interview James Comey. I've gotten to interview. We had just had an interview with Mike Love of the Beach Boys just last week. So I mean, you talk about divergent paths. We're getting ready to interview Richard Haas this coming week. Before Memorial Day. And we talked to the FDA commissioner, whose name eludes me now, Mark, but we just had him on. We talked to the Surgeon General with all this COVID stuff. And then we talked to our politicians like Cory Gardner, our senator, Michael Bennett, who was a presidential candidate. So yes, I mean, it's great to get access to them and ask questions and try to get answers. And what we try to do is try to advance the conversation. It's kind of like, again, when we were talking before we started the broadcast, it is kind of frustrating, at least in sports, to use that venue. When a player makes a major player does something significant, the first thing they ask is, how do you feel? That doesn't get to the layer. You almost want to say, what were you thinking in that moment, and when did you know that this was going to be special, or you were going to swing the bat, or you were going to take the shot, or you had that chance? Those are the kind of questions I try to ask and try to get to a deeper layer and deeper understanding, because our mission is to advance the conversation. Because going over the same ground over and over, two things. You can ask the same questions over and over, and a lot of times people are not going to change their answers. They're just not. But, we always are trying to look to exact our pound of flesh, and it doesn't make sense. So you can either ask the question a different way or try to get to a different layer. And then one of the things that I've learned in the process, and other people much better than I at doing this than interviews, really listen, because when you listen to somebody, they can say something that'll take the interview in a totally different direction than you thought it was going to go, and may even be better or more illuminating or more enlightening. And that's what I like to do. We really try to have a conversation with the guests we have on. And the toughest thing is, though, because we're not a pure talk show, what we do on Colorado's Morning News, we maybe have 5, 6, 7 minutes at most to try to get the most information. So there's not a lot of fluff, not a lot of setup. We try to get to the heat of the meat and get to the substance of things as best we can, in that amount of time. And then obviously, if it was good, have them on again to talk about something else. I mean, in the case of politicians, you have them on all the time so you can continue to evolve those conversations. But when you have a chance with James Comey, you only have X amount of time. And granted, he's there to push a book, so their agenda is to get books sold. But you get a chance to ask him questions that maybe other people in the media haven't had a chance to ask. So we try to take a little different tack with the people we have on. We try not to go over the same ground.
Well, like you were saying before we started recording, I was telling you I interviewed Nils a couple of days ago, who is a great jazz guitarist. And we started out I had this set of questions that I wanted to ask him, and it went in a total different direction. But it was fascinating to hear him say how, I go back to the Keith Richards story about how he wrote Satisfaction, where he was in a hotel in Florida and he was stoned out of his mind. Keith Stone, who would have thunk it? But, he got the riff and he played it on this tape recorder, and all you hear is snoring at the end because he was so out of it. But he says you get that just a quick little lick or a riff, and you build upon it. You said, okay, let's bring in some bass here. Let's bring in some more keyboards here and more guitar levels here, and it was fascinating to hear him tell how he wrote songs or how the melodies came to him.
Well, the best hit song's always on the back of a cocktail napkin. And 5 minutes later,
exactly,
it's a hit song. I mean, yeah, all the great songwriters, when you hear stories about John Lennon and Paul McCartney, or, the great song Yesterday, it was originally Scrambled Eggs, because that was the lyric that came in his head and how he remembered it. I mean, you hear these stories and you start laughing, thinking, that is unbelievable that these geniuses just do certain things, and you think, but it's how they construct it and how they frame it and the phrasing and the lyric. I mean, that's why it's unbelievable art. And that kind of art, like your pictures, I mean, that stuff lives on forever. And and you influence and impact people in such a way that is unbelievably special and unique.
Well, I've heard the interview with Jimmy Page a couple of times, and it's on YouTube. And he was my favorite song. The first time I heard this song, I was like 13 years old, and it was off Zeppelin 4. It was When the Levee Breaks.
Yes.
That's by far my favorite song. When I first heard the Bonzo's drum beat, I'm like, oh my God. It was like the lights went off. And I dissect music. I listen to music differently than a lot of people. But I heard the story about how Jimmy Page did that. Robert Plant and John Paul Jones were not at Headley Grange that night. He told Bonzo, he says, I want to try something. And they put him at the base of the stairs, and they mic'd him from above. So that's how you got that hollow boom drum beat. And it was genius. It was just the luck of the draw. And that's what is fascinating about music. Because another example, Fran Sheehan, the bassist for Boston, is a good friend of mine. And he told me the story about how when they were doing Four-Play Long Time, and the lead guitar, after the keyboard intro, Barry Goodrow plays lead guitar little solo there. And Franny was telling me, he said Barry couldn't figure anything out, so he went out and had some of Mother Nature, if you know what I mean, and he
Yeah.
laid it down just like that. It just came to him, and it's amazing how stuff like that. That's what's fascinating about music. And like you said, the moment that somebody hits the game-winning home run or throws the pass or scores the goal or whatever, what was the thought process going through their mind?
It's funny when you say that, because one of the best experiences I had, and I didn't do this on the air, but when you mentioned Boston, when I worked at the rock station in Denver, the Hawk, it's now defunct. We bought Boston to Red Rocks, and Red Rocks. How about venue? Red Rocks is an iconic, wonderful venue. My radio station bought Boston to Red Rocks, and of course we're backstage for about an hour before the concert. Myself and a couple of my colleagues, we had the best conversation with the late great Brad Delp.
Oh, Brad was awesome.
And you respect his art so much, but the things that we talked about and how gracious he was, I just remember walking away from that discussion. Well, two things. When I heard that he had passed, and at the time I had no idea that he had struggles and issues with depression and those sorts of things, and that makes me sad, because he seemed like such a brilliant, bright light with the things he talked about and the vision he had, and just talking about music. And I mean, this is just a basic conversation about life and about music and about what he's doing. And the thing is, he would ask us questions. Hey, well, what's this? Or how's this? And I just remember being blown away thinking, here's a guy whose music I grew up listening to. I mean, my high school class song at Columbine High School was Don't Look Back. And I remember just thinking, I'm talking to Brad Delp, and how cool is that? And I have pictures of them. They're on my on my Facebook page and that. And I was blown away again by somebody who is just such a master, one of the best vocalists, one of the best voices in all of rock. And to have that conversation and talk about music and talk about life, I just remember sitting there thinking, I will never be afforded another opportunity like this with somebody like that. And to your point, when you have access to people like that, it changes your perspective. And it really just changed my perspective. Not that it was a bad person, but saying, oh my God, I can't believe I'm talking to somebody who has so much soul and positivity and really kindness. He was just kind and unbelievable. So no, when you mentioned that, it just made me, flash back to talking to Brad Delp back in 1997, 1998.
Brad was, he was always nice to me. I've met him several times, and I'll never forget the day I'm driving in my car and my phone rings and it's Fran Sheehan, and he's, Bob, Brad's dead. And he told me, and I turned, what? He told me what happened, and he said no one knew he had the depression, and he was very good to his brother-in-law.
I didn't know that, and that shows you. And talking on a serious level, you never know what battles people are fighting, and it doesn't matter if you are affluent, wealthy, famous or not. That these things, they don't care about demographics. They don't care about, a lot of things that we sometimes think, well, you're this, and that. No, these afflictions happen to everybody of all walks of life. And it really made me sad, because you don't know. And had I known at the time you struggled with that, what am I going to do? And say, hey, I really hope you're okay and you're wonderful and you do this. It wouldn't have been my place. And two, it was just, you just look at it and say, he's like, I wish I'd have known, but I'm glad I didn't know, because I had such a wonderful conversation. Yeah, you run through all those things through your head and thinking, that is amazing. A kind person like that would feel the way he felt or had those issues. I'd have never known. No idea.
Brad, for people who don't know, Brad could sing the phone book and it would sound.
Oh God, yeah.
There's very few rock and roll singers that are actual singers. Freddie Mercury comes to mind.
Yeah.
Steve Walsh with Kansas comes to mind. These guys could actually really sing. Brad was up there with those guys. The guy had a vocal range that was unbelievable. And, it's sad that, unfortunately what happened with him, but, just to hear him sing, it gives you goosebumps. And another story, when Keith Moon died Keith was on a self-destructive path anyways. He was, everybody knew he wasn't going to live long. He was just, I'm Keith Moon. I can out-drink and out-drug you. And, of course, the drugs that kept him off booze killed him.
Yes.
And the story goes that when Pete Townsend found out, he calls up Roger, and the only thing he said, well, he's gone and done it. Meaning they knew, but there was nothing they could do. he was a self-destructive person, and in a way, it kind of leads you to Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett, and
Yeah.
that was he was just fried on acid. His brain was gone, and that's just sad how something like that happens to these people that have more talent in their pinky than I have through my whole body. They are in that level that is so far above everybody else. And
Right. And in the more current iterations, it would be Kurt Cobain.
Yes.
When you think about somebody like that, who's very talented, but had, when I say a darkness, I don't mean that negative, but had those dark feelings and that depression, but that's where his art came from. I mean, a lot of times the tremendous talents of these musicians, it probably comes from a dark and sometimes sad place, and the way they express it is in music. And it could be wrong. Maybe I feel you see that more with musicians than maybe other things. Like, obviously, I'm sure athletes deal with depression. I know we've seen the stories, but there's when you're in a sport, it's a little different than, probably creating a song or writing a book. It's a little different creative outlet. I mean, I guess if you're depressed, you could go knock someone's head off in a football game and you deal with it, but you don't hear it, and maybe it's the machismo of being an athlete, but you hear it more to some degree with the musicians. And again, they create this beautiful art, this music, and then you realize later it's coming from sometimes a very dark and sad place.
You mentioned something about football and somebody, that block going out and hitting somebody. Did you ever get hit so hard that knocked you on your what, that you saw the cobwebs and the whole bit on a block or something like that? Or
Oh yeah, I mean, it's scary now because we know so much more about concussions and the like. But I mean, I got my bell rung my sophomore year in high school when I was called up to the varsity and I was playing on special teams, and it was by one of my own teammates. The seniors, man, there's a couple guys that they just tattooed me, and I remember getting up and honestly, it's like, where am I and what day is it? I mean, literally that. And then they give you the smelling salts. Shake it off. Your bell's rung. You're good.
Yeah.
Had those. Had another one in high school, later in high school when I was a senior, playing by one of my former teammates, Dan Hawk, who played at the rival high school. We played together at CSU, but he was a linebacker as a receiver. I came across the middle on a play, and he took me out. So I remember that. Not when I played for CSU. I was lucky, knock on wood, but when I was a scout team player, we had some pretty tough defenders, great guys like D.L. Carr and Ron Cortell that could hit. And when I was running scout team, which is the opposing team's offense for that week, ironically, I was running the University of Colorado's wishbone offense, so I was a running back. I remember, and I was like a lead block in it. I remember those guys just literally pounding my head into the dirt over and over. And it's the repetitive piece, and then just one time getting laid out. And it's nothing malicious. It's just a part of the game. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's many times that had they had the concussion protocol back then, I probably would have been out for 2 weeks after, getting knocked and getting hit hard.
Well, that's the thing that most people do not get. You and I, CG, we're lucky. We have media credentials. We're on the field for these games. You're standing on the sidelines. And if you're on the sidelines for a football game and you're up that close, you then realize how hard these kids hit or the pros hit. And it's like the old adage, just like that violent truck collision. I mean, I was at a Georgia Tech Miami game in Atlanta at Grant Field, and I saw some hits and I just cringed. It's like, and the guys just pop right back up, and I'm like, I'd be in traction for a week.
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, what they've learned about the concussions, and even when you look at hits, and I'll reference this because you'll remember this. The hit that Darryl Stingley took, the late great Patriots wide receiver, it wasn't an overly violent hit. It was the way his body was contorted in that play. And so, sometimes you see the hits and think they're really violent, but they get up. And other times you think, oh, he got hit, but then he's not moving. And you realize because it was the angle or the way that they got hit that caused greater damage. So we don't know. The point about concussions, it's the repetitiveness of it. It's like if you're an offensive lineman and you continue to get hit in the head or you're banging helmets, it may not be violent in that it's the Steve Atwater, Christian Okoye hit, the famous hit.
Exactly.
Where it's like, boom, and they both were fine. It's the repetitiveness of that could do the brain damage. But like I said, even if some of these players that have gotten these spinal injuries, it's not that the hit's overly violent. It's just that they're in the wrong position at the wrong time, and how they're hit jacks up the. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's a risk. It's a risky sport, and there's a reason that some of these athletes in the NFL are paid a lot of money. And the reason why there's a short shelf life for, say, running backs, because it's a violent sport. There's no way you can legislate the violence out of it. You can be smarter about tackling technique, which gets back to Urban Meyer. He took his coaches, I remember hearing the story at Ohio State, and they went to go watch a rugby practice and learn how to tackle as they do in rugby. Two things. It's actually better technique. You actually get to the guy at the ground, but then you are safer in the process of doing it. So and of course, part of it is the glory of ESPN and as we call it, the kill shot. They want the sexy big hit that makes the highlight reel, but it's not technically the best way to tackle. So you learn how to tackle more technically, but you're safer in the process. So those are the things that we're starting to see now and value more, is that if you have proper technique, for the most part, those things can still happen. Some of those injuries can be prevented. You try to eliminate it as best you can, the head-to-head, though sometimes it's just incidental. You can't help it, which gets in that whole level of how you officiate it and what you do. So I do think they're trying to put their best forward. And the NFL has been better. They were bad at first about, really looking at the data of concussions and trying to do well, because we've had, we think of the late, great Mike Webster, the great center for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who ended up, because of probably CTE, ended up getting depressed, ended up on the streets, ended up homeless because he had mental issues because of the repetitiveness of playing football. And we have a tendency as lay people to think, oh, these guys are millionaires and they're going to be fine for life. Well, not necessarily, because they may not know how to spend their money. People may take advantage of them, or the more important thing, they have health issues. Junior Seau, people like that. I mean, they have. So we have to be honest and take a look at that. I mean, I want to enjoy the game, and I still do. But there is a part of me, my son plays football, and I think about his safety and concern for him in that process, realizing anything is dangerous, but if we can do things to at least mitigate it or try to make it safer, that's the thing, the route to go.
Yeah, you mentioned Junior Seau. No one knew, and he ended up committing suicide. And CTE, we did. This is all fairly new to us. All this CTE stuff. They're doing all these brain studies with deceased football players, and they're finding out most of them had CTE.
Yeah.
Mike Curtis just passed away. He had it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Mad Dog was he was as violent as they come. As a middle linebacker, that guy would knock you into tomorrow if he could.
Well, and I don't mean to be gruesome or graphic, but Junior Seau was aware enough that to where when he took his own life, he shot himself in the chest and not in the head, because he knew he wanted them to take a look and take a look at his brain. That'll be the next big medical breakthrough, and I'm hoping we're closer to that, to where you can actually look at a live person and look at maybe their brain and determine that they have a form of CTE or something like that, as opposed to seeing it post-mortem. I mean, I'm hopeful for that for a variety of reasons, because more importantly, I think about our men and women who serve in armed combat that are around armaments or get, shot at or are blown up because they're by bombs and those things. And obviously you see the physical toll, they lose limbs, but the concussion and the things that happen on with the head. I hope there's a way that we can diagnose these things earlier when people are alive and find ways to treat or at least mitigate, some of the causes and effects.
I completely agree with you. I hope there is a cure, or not a cure, but some sort of way of determining what's going on.
Treatment. Yeah,
exactly. Marty, I know you've got things to do. Can we talk again sometime?
I would love this. I would love this. So I'm just
if you ever need anybody on your morning show,
hey, I'm going to tell you, you're an expert when it comes to stadiums and photos. I'd love to have you on. And I mean, here's what I'm excited about. If we get to actually have a sports season of some sort, it would be great to talk about getting out and circulating game and seeing some of the great facilities that these wonderful, a lot of these teams play in of any sport. I would love to have that conversation with you.
And I'd also like to come back once it gets back to semi-normal. I want to go to a CSU game with you. I mean, I think we would have a blast.
Oh God, yes.
I mean, that's just it's fun to go with people who are in the know and have played, and you can kind of pick their brain and they can pick yours, and it's just a fun. If anybody has never been to a college football game, you've got to go. Because by far it's so much better than pro, and I will stand by that, because you have, like you were saying, you've got your jerseys, your team colors, you've got the alums from the past 50 years going to games. It's an experience like no other.
Well, and in my case, I feel like I have skin in the game. As a former player for my university, I feel like obviously they get my financial investment now, but my emotional investment, I am emotionally. I joke and say I have a problem. And my problem is this. I care about what 18 to 22-year-old young men do on a Saturday. And if they lose, it's amazing how at 52, where I can be so intellectually disconnected, that it upsets me, that it affects my day. But if they win, I'm happy. So I have a problem. I must confess to you, I have a problem. I love my school, and when they win, it makes me very happy.
My wife Noreen is the same way with her Bruins. There are, it's football Saturday here. We had season tickets for the Rose Bowl for about 10 years, and there was nothing like it. I mean, I saw Michigan, Alabama, I see all everybody, and it's just a lot of fun. But she, it's like me and the Red Sox. Everybody, I can cuss them out, but you can't.
That's right. That's family, right? Yeah.
It's like with PSU and you. You can't say anything bad about them, but I can.
But I can. That's what I always say. Hey, I'll take him to task. I will take him. But no, you don't have a right to. You're right.
He is the Lenz man. Check him out in Denver on KOA. Marty, this was awesome, and we will message. And I hope to talk to you again soon. And let's talk music next time.
I would love that, Bob. I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty, and we will talk to you soon.